1, 2, 3.
Welcome to Scéalta. My name is Joe Austin, and can I remind those who have joined us this evening that Scéalta is a joint Fáilte Fierce to Hear Film and Fubble production. My guest I'm in conversation with tonight is someone who has been at the very centre of civic society in West Belfast for over 30 years. I suspect that he is someone whose name most people will have heard of or will know. I don't really think that most people would recognise him. And despite all of that, he has written hundreds of editorials about every issue that affects life in West Belfast and further afield. He has thousands upon thousands of words, of comments and commentary about life and everyday life and the things, again, that affect the area, the place, where we live. He's also an accomplished author, and I want to come to that. He is indeed Robin Livingstone. Robin, it is wonderful to meet you. And I know that I know by the very nature of you that you don't do this very often, through choice, I would add. So I appreciate it. You are the editor of the media group, the Andersonstown Media Group. You're a 30-year journalist.
Yeah, I'm just to clear that up. Joe, I'm the group editor, so yeah. I have responsibility for all titles. Anthony Neeson, my very dear friend and colleague, is the editor of the Andersonstown News now. So I earn my spurs, if you like, as editor of the Andersonstown News and a reporter before that. But I'm essentially a desk jockey now, sort of work on other people's work, do a wee bit of writing myself, editorials, a wee bit of feature writing and stuff like that. Do a bit of tweeting, and probably more than a bit of tweeting, if you like. But essentially, I'm a bureaucrat or a technocrat, you might say, which is pushing a mouse and a keyboard around all day and working on other people's work. So we have 3 titles in Belfast, which is the Andersonstown News, which is the flagship, of course, with the North Belfast News, and we have the South Belfast News, and of course with the Irish Echo in New York. So I have sort of overarching responsibility for all those. And I would dip in and out of most of them, as and when required.
And I have to say, you're the other half of Patricia, and the father.
Yes.
Just to get it.
Father of 3. That's Patricia's my wife. Yes, Patricia Lavery, as was from Riverdale, and my eldest Katie, who has just I'd like to share a bit of news with you. She got a fantastic new job, and she starts her lectureship in September, which we're all extremely proud and humbled and honoured by. So she's been an absolute delight. Aoife's finishing her PGCE at Queen's with St Dominic's today. She went back to her alma mater, which she loved very much. And Joe is studying at Ulster University, and unfortunately he's a basketball nut, but and Ulster University, one of the reasons he went there was because it's a fantastic basketball centre, but the pandemic killed that for him, so I feel a wee bit sorry for him there. So that's my 3 children and my wife.
And I'm told you're about to have a Portuguese son-in-law?
Portuguese son-in-law, Frederico Lopes Moita, who's an absolute gentleman, such a polite and well brought up young man. Just delighted to have him in the family. Ava's partner James is a countryman from up near the Farmers Inn there, and we're very blessed and lucky to have 2 such wonderful young men who are coming aboard and going to be part of our lives for a very long time.
I want to talk to you about journalism, and I want to talk to you about that part of your life, which is only a part of your life. Last night, in preparation for this conversation, I revisited the book that you had given me, the book, The Road, that you had signed for me, which I have in my book collection, I have to say. And I just kind of looked back over it and through it again. It's a very moving book. It's a very telling book, I suppose, of the times in which you and your family grew up. And so Dover Street begins it all. So tell me a wee bit about that.
Well, but I've just noticed that if anybody thinks it's a bit dark here, it's a gorgeous day outside, and I've pulled the curtains on technical instructions, but it's nice. I like something like this. It actually started in Majorca Street, Joe.
Where?
Majorca Street, which is right beside the Royal Victoria Hospital, just on Roden Street there. And I was born in a house in Majorca Street, off Roden Street, right at the gates of Roden Street Barracks. I mean, literally right there, at the gates at the end house. We lived there until 1966. I was born in December 1960. We lived there until I just turned 60, actually. I just turned 60 there at Christmas. I haven't got my bus.
Congratulations. Is that where the white hair comes from?
No, I have my white hair. I had my white hair a long time before that. That's a sad and sorry tale to relate. And, you know, it's a lot of people responsible for this white hair, you know, and I'll hold them responsible sometime. But so 1960, born there, a very, very large family. 1966 were the last one. Julie was born, and that was a 2-bedroom house with 15 people in it. So clearly that was, what's the word, shall we say, unsustainable, Joe? Would that be?
Yeah, well, we used to call it in Carrickhill overcrowding.
Overcrowding, a genteel overcrowding.
Yeah,
Shall we say? I will move to a cavernous 3-story house in Dover Street, which links which links Divis Street to the Shankill, which is more or less facing where St. Comgall School is now, down just a wee bit, but you get the general idea. So I'll take you quickly through all the stages. We were burnt out of there in 1969. We moved to Carryduff in South Belfast. Then we moved to Divis Flats, and then up the road to Lennodown, which was right in the country, which is where my lifelong love of the outdoors and birds and our wildlife and our gorgeous countryside, idyllic youth there. So that was my childhood, Joe, in terms of where we came from. A lot of people think it started in Dover Street, but it started in Majorca Street at the back of the barracks.
The book, I mean, I come from a large family as well, and I come from a family of 13, like yourself.
Same as me, yeah.
In the book, you kind of outline what I have to say, apart from the experience of being physically affected by your home, your mother rescuing Julie, carrying over a back wall, and all that sort of stuff in the dead of the night, while there's howling mobs outside burning houses about you. But up until that point, you seem to have had an idyllic childhood.
Well, do you know, Joe, it was really, I mean, that's it. I imagine there's sort of a rose-tinted spectacles and all the rest of it. But, you know, it was extraordinarily close and loving family, you know. We had our fights and all that crap. But,
yeah, of course.
And back then, you spent your life on the streets, you know. I mean, I was too young in Majorca Street. I wouldn't have been up and about. But certainly in Dover Street, I mean, there's none of this. I mean, your mother you're sitting on a settee, your mother would come in and say, "What are you doing in here?" Do you know? And she'd throw you out because, yeah, just go out and play. You know, what are you doing in here? Or if we were all in, there's a massive number of us, and there weren't enough seats, so you'd have to sit on the floor, and that led to a lot of forced closeness, if you like. It's not forced because they're your blood, but at the same time, forced physical closeness, which also had an extraordinarily beneficial effect, I think, you know. I mean, eating together at breakfast, I mean, the table was full, you know. You had a towering plate of toast in the morning and a pot of porridge, which was the size of a witch's cauldron, you know. And so all that, I mean, I'm not saying it was Shangri-La or anything, but it was that forced closeness brought a closeness about, and then the very closeness of the streets themselves brought people close in a way that perhaps you don't see now.
I came away from my own experience of growing up in a big family. You know, you really had to sink or swim. Now, not in a harsh way, but you learn to deal with people. You learn to read people's idiosyncrasies and all of that. That's absolutely. And I think the book talks about that. One of the things I wanted to ask you, Archie, your father, you know the Stanton joke in West Belfast, Archie Stanton beside Jerry Adams, and somebody says, "Who's your mom with Archie?" Not the other way around. But your father was known.
He was. he was extraordinarily well known, and what's little known about him, Joe, except by people who be in the know, is that he was an absolutely wonderful Republican.
Oh yeah.
In his own way, in his own way. I mean, none of my parents were overtly political, but certainly my mother shied away from that. But my father was very quietly Republican. But the reason he was well known, Joe, is that he was an absolutely outstanding singer and performer, and he was known as an MC about Belfast and beyond. So he was what was known back then as front cloth. He would be the front. He would front up any entertainment. He would sing and introduce other people, and he had his name up and Archie Livingstone on Tonight, this and that. So Archie was a lorry driver. He started off with horses in his youth. He had an absolutely lifelong passion for horses, not just with the racing horses, which we enjoy together very much. We love the racing, and I still do. But the horses that he worked with, and he had hoped to retire to Rostrevor, a wee place he loved in County Down, and get a few horses out. that never worked out. So he progressed on to lorries then, Joe, and became a lorry driver, and that's how I grew up with him as a lorry driver. There was always a lorry outside our house, and so. But as an entertainer, he would finish work and he'd come home and he'd roll his sleeves up and he'd scrub his arms like a surgeon, you know. I remember he used to stand there. We all used to mob him when he came home, and we'd follow him upstairs, and he'd just scrub his arms. I mean, like really scrub them, you know. He'd come downstairs and he'd screw the foreman a tally about the horses, and then he'd have his dinner, and then he'd go up and have a proper wash and a shave, and my mother would have laid all his clothes out for him, even his socks and his shoes, you know. I mean, lifted and laid his entire life, and then out he'd go. That was his evenings. So he was performing in the evenings and driving lorries during the day. And I should point out, he took me out in the lorry a lot with him, and took all of us out from time to time. And funnily enough, I have a lifelong obsession and passion with lorries, you know. Modern lorries. I can't drive along without seeing lorries. If I see a nice lorry, I'll stop and get out and have a look at it. My favourite is a big Renault. So modern trucks as well, not just the vintage ones. But that's another passion of mine I've got from my father. But yes, he was extraordinarily well known because he played a lot in venues in all parts of the city. I should add, Joe, north, south, east, and west.
And I have to say, and it's not about Archie, it's about you, but let me just indulge and tell you this very
No, that's a lot. That's a huge part of who I am.
You talked about his entertainment and his republicanism and all of that. And he was very quick-witted. He never ever stumped for an answer. I remember asking him one time, I'm from Carrickhill, as I keep telling everybody who wants to listen, but I remember with him one time when we were talking about how, this was in the 70s, how people had become less terrified of the RUC than a generation prior to that in the 50s and the 40s. And he was lamenting that people in the 40s and the 50s hadn't stood up because then people in the 60s and 70s wouldn't have had to. All that general conversation. And he talked about being a young man, and he said the style of the day was that young men wore winkle picker shoes. These shoes were very, very defined points. And he said, and the difference between the generation was that one RUC man on the beat terrified a whole community.
Mm.
You know, they chased young men from the corner, and they apprehended truants from school and all that stuff. And he said he was standing at the corner of the street, and this cop came along and told him to move, him and his friends, and we're doing nothing. And they said, we're not doing anything. And the cop said to him, and at that stage after 10 o'clock, the RUC put on London bobby type hats, these like reinforced hats. And maybe they only done it on the falls or working class areas, but they put them on. And this cop said to him, oh, right, you're not doing nothing. Are you speaking for everybody? And he said, no, we're not doing nothing. And the cop said to him, does your feet go right to the end of those shoes? And the father said, does your head go right to the end of that hat? Whether that ever happened or not, I don't know. But let me tell you this, he's quite capable of having done that. So Enough,
Oh, no.
enough of our.
Absolutely. He was fond of the odd run-in with the good men and women of the state when
Law and order.
he was in his cups, shall we say, when he was en route home from a night out. Many's the confrontation he had with them.
I'm told you were very bright at school.
Well, it wouldn't be for me to say, but I mean, my educational record wouldn't really reflect that. I mean, you could O levels and A levels and ended up a journalist and what have you. But no, it was just English, really, Joe. Let me explain something. I was born with a lazy eye, which meant that my left eye was turned into my nose, and I grew up with a patch on my good eye and glasses my entire childhood. So that sort of made me a wee bit solitary, and I just turned to reading, which is a passion of mine now. I just read voraciously and non-stop, although with the walking now I do a lot of audiobooks as well. So I took to reading very, very early, and my father and mother would bring me in things, I mean, just to read, because there was never enough for me to read, and it was a running joke that we'll have to find Robin something to read. My mother used to, when she went to bingo, used to hoover up all the beaten bingo cards, and there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them, and she'd bring them back for me in a bag, because at the top of every bingo card there's a wee sort of aphorism, a wee word of the wise, which was
We quotation.
yeah, we quote of wisdom or whatever, and she'd bring them home. And when I was a small child, I would sit and read every single one of them, just because there was nothing else to read. I'd get any books, I'd read it. And so it was a bit, not entirely solitary, I wouldn't like to say that it was, but so I started reading at a very young age, and that gave me a bit of a boost, if you like. And that morphed into a love of language, all languages, by the way. My daughter studied speech and language, and I have a great passion for languages and phonetics and all that. And that morphed into being reasonably good at English, I suppose. And that was, so I would always be the one to be asked. I was always asked to read if the inspector came, or I was always put forward and all that crack. So something my parents were very proud of, but I mean, I was, and the family sort of know that. So I mean, it wouldn't be me punting it, you know. But
Well, the whole purpose of Scéalta is that people know a wee bit more about you at the end of the conversation than they do at the beginning. So I think it is important. Were you always destined to be a journalist? Was that
no, I wanted to drive lorries, and I'd still love to drive a lorry, you know. I'm absolutely passionate about lorries and lorry drivers, and always stop and let lorry drivers out, and that's me to my dialect, you know. So I know it just seemed to me that when I came to a time, I was never like, you want to be a fireman, or you want to be a nurse, or you want to be a doctor, or you want to be a bricklayer or whatever. I want to be a journalist. No, but when it came to a certain age, you're saying, what can I do with myself? You just say, well, sort of do something with writing or English, or that was just sort of organically the idea, if you like, you know. So,
and 30 years ago, you wandered into the Andersonstown. You began as a columnist for television.
Yeah, Martin Miller rang me up one day and asked me if I would do. He wasn't long started himself. Martin and I are of an age, so we would have been early mid-20s, something like that, and I was not long out of college, and he asked me if I'd like to do movie reviews, because I love my movies. It's another thing that I love as well. I was absolutely delighted, you know. And so I started doing movie reviews, and then they asked me to do a TV review. So I was doing movies and TV reviews just as a contributor, Joe. And the three people that Martin and I would both acknowledge as being three of the most important people in our lives, Seamus McShane and Basil McLaughlin, were there, and that was the start. So I was doing that for a while, and one time I'd met Patricia, and it was we were thinking of tying a knot, and I sort of trying to get a bit of money, and I got a seasonal job in the post office, sin Scéalta, as they say, sin Scéalta. But I was on the break one day, and the phone went, and somebody said, "You wanted on the phone," and I went to the phone, and it was Seamus McShane, and he says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm working at the post office," and he said, "Get up here." This was at Christmas. And I says, "I can't, I'm working." He says, "Well, sure you work here?" And I said, "Well, I don't." And he says, "Will you do now?" So I went and told him I was leaving, which was a source of some relief, let me tell you, because the post office at that time was it was I'm not going to say it was a partial of rogues, but it was let's just say it wasn't security conscious, if you know. And that particular day, this is before long before the internet, and at that time, if you wanted some private pictures with your wife or your paramour, or you were interested in niche material, shall we say, you sent the photographs away to England, which were sent back to you in a discreet envelope. And of course, every postman in the place could send these discreet envelopes at 300 paces. So they would always be opened at lunchtime and passed around. And being a youngish man at that time, and not being a post office veteran, it was an eye opener. So I got the call from Seamus and hightailed it up to Owen Vara, and the rest is the rest.
You're far better out of that environment anyway.
Oh God, but I believe it's a much better place to work now. But it was colourful at that time, Joe. Let's just leave it at that.
I rang a journalist who you know, when I won't name, last night, to say that I was speaking to for the conversation tonight, and I was looking for trick questions, difficult questions, and he wasn't giving me any. And I said, "What's the difference between community journalist, a journalist that writes for a community paper, and someone who's working for one of the more established agencies?" And he said, "Integrity." So I don't know how you would agree with that startness, but the headlines that you have covered over the 30 years and the editorials, I mean, are absolutely memorable.
Well, it's further to judge. I like to think there's a large amount of integrity involved, but of course, it's in every walk of life. Sometimes you have to compromise your integrity to some degree or another in order to get things done, or in order to achieve something. But what I would say about community newspapers, as opposed to daily newspapers or the rest of the media, and what I should say is the Andersonstown News is an absolute hothouse of journalistic talent over the years. I mean, I stayed, but a lot of our journalists were en route to a job with daily newspapers or the radio or the television, and have done extraordinarily well. And if I were to rattle you off a list of people I have worked with over the years, it would be a real eye opener for you. Yeah. And I think most of them would agree that the Andersonstown News is not a Sunday tabloid, or that it's not a red top tabloid, and that our first duty is to boost our community at all costs. And I don't think that's something that, don't get me wrong, the Andersonstown News is very much there to create jobs, and without generating revenue, and without working with business, and without an economic model, none of that is possible. And within that rubric, if you like, there are always compromises to be made, and there are always decisions of integrity to be made, and sometimes that means doing things you'd rather not do in terms of the content of the paper, but generally speaking, I think most people who have been through the Andersonstown News and have worked with me and other extraordinary people who I've worked with would agree that the Andersonstown News has always planted this idea to them that we are first and foremost a community booster. So if someone comes to us, for instance, with a story about a school, my first thought, because this is what I was taught when I was in my 20s, my first thought, a negative story about a school, I should say, we have tons and tons and tons of positive stuff about schools. You just can't get enough of it. Somebody comes with a negative story, and my first thought is, why are we doing this? It's not, Jesus, that's a great story, people are going to love this, because it's negative, and people do love negative stuff. There's just no getting away from it. My first thought is, why are we doing this? And secondly, can I not do this and help the school? Or the big thing you have there is, if we don't do it, and it's well known out there that this is happening, it'll damage our credibility very badly. So that there's a real tightrope to walk there. For instance, a very good example of a wonderful school is De La Salle, which went through a few travails in recent years in terms of the pitch there, and in terms of some staff issues over the last few years. And we covered that extensively, both of those issues. And it was difficult with the school, because what I wanted to do more than anything else is have a great relationship with De La Salle and to help the children and the parents, and therefore boost this community, same with every other school. And that's what everybody in a senior position and in a lower position in the Andersonstown News works towards. Whereas the first thought of a daily newspaper or a radio phone in or a red top or a Sunday tabloid is, that's a great story and people will read it. Don't get me wrong, we're driven by clicks and readership as well, but that'll be my first thought, that we try and boost this community. Don't always get it right, and on a Thursday, which is always the most difficult day of the week, is when you get the complaints when the paper goes out, and Thursday's always, for any Andersonstown editor, Andersonstown News editor, or editor of any of our papers indeed, and indeed any editor of any weekly newspaper will tell you this, and daily newspapers as well, but given that they go out 6 days a week, it's not as scoped into one day. So Thursday's always a day where people ring up to complain a lot and say this and that. Unfortunately, people don't. It's the same sad reality of life, that people don't ring up to say well done as much as they do to complain. So first of all, we're a community booster, and that's what we're about. And that's why our business has morphed into community events as well. And that's largely been driven by Marcino Miller, who's absolutely outstanding in terms of outreach and in terms of his networking and the tirelessness with which he gets involved with all these things. I mean, so that's a newish, I stress, because the Icing Awards have been going for the longest time now. I think it's 20 years or more now, isn't it? So, but that's a newish part of our business and what we're about is reaching out to the community, being part of the community and boosting the community. So that for me would be the main difference, Joe, would be that idea of being a community booster.
You mentioned that, and I suspect lots of people would be surprised that there is a sister paper, The Echo, in America. And again, speaking to people, and lots of people in America who have a friendship with Ireland, maybe a family connection, maybe a spiritual connection, their first port of call to get a view on an event that happened is The Echo. And the best example I can think of is the reporting of the Ballymurphy cases and stuff like that. Is it difficult to try and coordinate, a New York paper?
No, that's a very good point, Joe. And I'm going to be quite honest here and say the Echo is the one title that I would be least hands-on with, because I'm not from New York, nor do I do any writing. Anthony Neeson, who's the Andersonstown News editor, has done extraordinary work over the years with the Echo, and of course Marcin is absolutely umbilically tied into the Echo on a daily basis. But in terms of the journalism, Anthony Neeson has been absolutely outstanding in his coverage, and a lot of the sterling work on victims and legacy that the Echo does for that important Irish American community in New York comes through the reporting of Anthony Neeson, who is our point man for the Irish Echo, if you like, here in Belfast. So that will be my least hands-on, if you like. My bread and butter would be Andersonstown North and South, and of course the website, which is expanding daily.
I want to give you a break just from work for a second. And you mentioned about being a prolific reader.
Mm-hmm.
You're also a prolific walker. And
Yeah.
You recently lost your dog, Alfie.
Yeah. Alfie, yeah. Alfie's
difficult.
Huh?
Difficult for you?
I've got an Alfie stone on here, Joe. I have an Alfie stone I'm looking at here. I was 14 stone for 12 or 14 years, absolutely unwavering, and I had the dog for 10 years. Since then I've gone over 15 stone. Well, I'm 6 feet, so it doesn't look ridiculous on me, but I still need to lose a stone, and that's because the discipline. I love walking, don't get me wrong, I still walk endlessly, but not as much as I did, because the discipline of having a dog follow you upstairs when you come home from work and thumping its tail on the ground and looking up at you is not there. So you tend to come home and sit a bit more than you did, and sort of snack a wee bit more than you did, especially working from home as well. So Alfie was a wee Jack Russell Fox Terrier cross, who we got in Cross McGlen, believe it or not.
Oh.
Drove my middle Jai Leafa down to get Alfie in Cross McGlen, and she refused to call him Rebel, so she christened him Alfonso, Alfie for short, and the second name was Rebel, so that was Alfonso Rebel. And he would have not only walked you from here to Dublin, he had a pulled you from here to Dublin. I mean, absolutely extraordinary energy. And the miles that we put in over the years, absolutely extraordinary. I mean, there's times we would walk and I would literally forget that I had to go back, so you'd find yourself like 2.5 hours from the car, and you're going, jeepers creepers, and 20 past 8, and it's starting to get dark, and that's 2.5 hour walk ahead of me here, so I mean, stuff like that. And I took nothing out of him, but he started to slow up a bit and put a wee bit of weight on, and he was having a few health problems, which eventually resulted in us making a very difficult decision to have him put down. That was just between Christmas and the New Year. So,
do you enjoy the solitude?
Yes, very much. But and my wife will tell you this, and anybody who knows me will tell you this. I enjoy my own company very much. I would not be a hail fellow well met, if you like. I mean, I wouldn't, like anybody else, you're louder if you have a couple of sherbets in you or whatever, but I wouldn't go seeking out company, if you know what I mean, and I would have a small circle of friends. I would not enjoy a walk anywhere near as much. Don't get me wrong, I have gone out walking with groups, and especially with bird watchers and what have you, but on my daily routine, that sort of solitude, and sometimes I have earphones in and sometimes not. It depends where I am. If I'm up the country, I tend not to, because I like to listen to what's going on around me. But if I'm in the city or whatever, I'll be cracking the pavements with an audiobook in or a podcast or whatever. And but yes, I would be a fan of my own company, and that's just the way I am, I suppose.
When I done the introduction to this conversation, I said that most people in the west of the city would know your name, and they know you're associated with the Andersonstown News. Most people, I suspect, wouldn't recognize you. They wouldn't know, and hopefully after this conversation, they'll know a bit more about it. I was quite surprised that on the first request you agreed to have a conversation with me, because I suspect that you've avoided these things for maybe not exactly this, but you don't thrust yourself into the limelight. That's the point that I'm making. Is that your choice?
Yeah, I used to, Joe. I mean, anybody in the the BBC or radio or TV or whatever will tell you that I used to do it on a regular basis. But it's just the rubber chicken circuit, you know. There are some people who are very good at it, and don't get me wrong. I mean, for instance, in terms of local radio, I wouldn't listen to any of it at all, except I'd listen to Talkback, because I think William Crawley's a really, really good broadcaster, and the stuff he does, particularly at the interface of faith and politics, and you know, he walks the walk. He gets a lot of stick, and he gets a lot of stick from me, but he does a great job, and I would listen to him. But that apart, and I don't want to go into it too much, but it's just sickening, quite frankly. You know, I just can't look at it. I mean, there's these people sitting there. I mean, what is it doing, or what is it saying, or it's just nonsense on a stick. And one time I just said to myself, I can't be doing this. I really can't be doing this. And what is this nonsense? You know, I remember being on with on the radio during Gino Gallagher's funeral. And it was the only time a complaint was ever made to the NUJ about me. And the guy, I can't remember who it was, asked me, are there any paramilitaries there? And I said, well, I said, I'm looking at about 45 Jeeps here. And I can see hundreds and hundreds of men in RoboCop uniforms. And so, yes, there's a lot of paramilitary activity here. If we're taking the word paramilitary, at its literal sense. And some charming Belfast colleague reported me. NUJ actually rang me up about it, and nothing to do with them. The death threats and the difficulties I've had over the years, and even a house takeover and what have you. NUJ are worse than rubbish. And the reason I'm in a union is because my father was an extraordinary union man and had the pins and the badges and the membership books and all that, which he kept religiously and wore as union pins as just as much as he did his scarf. So I joined a union as soon as I was in paid employment, and I've been in the union ever since. But I can't say NUJ has ever been anything sort of overly helpful. But somebody within the NUJ rang me up at that stage, and I don't know, are you allowed to use fruity language here? Joe?
Well, it depends how fruity, but you can tell. Yeah, you can, of course.
No, I told him to F off, you know.
Yeah. Now that's okay. You're allowed to say that. That's okay.
Yeah, I told him to F off. So that's I look. I know it's people's jobs, and they get paid to do it, and I got paid to do it, and I took the money as well. But it's just extraordinarily vacuous and banal, and I mean, it's just coming on time after time after time, just to say. And so as I say, not only did I stop doing it, but I stopped being a consumer of it as well, largely. I mean, I wouldn't watch tea time news, for instance. I would watch it at 10 o'clock if there were, I mean, for instance, I would have watched it last night and Newsnight because of the Dominic Cummings thing, just to get a sort of a roundup. But in terms of the news bulletins in the morning on Radio Ulster, the BBC News at 6 o'clock, the UTV News at 6 o'clock, I just can't bear it, you know. It's unbearable. It's vacuity, you know. But having said that, I listen to Talkback religiously every day, and I enjoy that very much. But so that was my decision not to do radio and TV, was the same time that I stopped really being a consumer of it, you know. So don't get me wrong, I watch a lot of history programs, and I watch Netflix and all the rest of it. So I'm not saying I'm a hermit or anything like that, but
we're glad that you've broken that. And I also have to say, I'm a lapsed member of the NUJ for some of the same reasons that you've outlined. I should also say that you have a stage name as well as a real name.
Well, yeah, my name's Robert. It's very, very complicated. Do you have 3.5 hours? I was named Robert after my dear late Uncle Bob in Manchester, who I have wonderful memories of him and my aunt Mona. Mona was a Manchester woman who worked in the theatre and knew a lot of was very much loved by a lot of English and British big theatre names, which, funny enough, I have a great graph for sort of English theatre from the past, movies from the past, and all that. It's sort of a retro thing. But anyway, so Bob married Mona, moved to Manchester, and I was named after my uncle Bob. So that was Robert. I was called Robin because my mom called me Robin because I was born at Christmas, and she thinks she's a wee Robin. It's nothing to do with my name. It's just more or less a nickname. And to complicate things even more horribly, people who are really close to me don't call me Robin, they call me Bob. So, I mean, anybody who would be a close friend of mine, I mean, a really close friend, I mean, like, sort of know my family well and stuff like that. I mean, your friends who are very close friends, but they wouldn't know your family well, for instance.
Yeah,
so if you have you have a really close friend, but then you have a really, really close friend who know you and your family and everything about you. But my immediate family and my close friends call me Bob, and that's what I prefer. That's my preferred name because I was named after my uncle Robert and my uncle Bob, and I know that makes his family in Manchester very happy. So is that complicated enough for you, Joe? Or?
It is complicated, but we aim to uncomplicate the complicated. I want to.
I'm not sure if we've accomplished that. But
Well, we have. Don't worry. I'll judge that. You're not the best judge. I want to ask you a couple of things because time is marching on. You know, we talked about you 30 years ago. We talked about you gradually moving through the Andersonstown youth to the position you have now. We talked about your appreciation of yourself, which is great. And if more of us had it, I think the world would be a wee bit happier.
Well, I don't have an appreciation of myself just because I like walking.
No. I mean the ability to enjoy yourself. I don't mean that you're fully yourself. It's a difference. There's a difference in it.
Okay.
But can I ask you, the management of the editorial end of it from the writing end of it? I mean, it must be quite difficult. People who are opinionated, like Squinter, for instance, are they hard to control? Are they hard to keep in line? I mean, they have a caustic sense of humor.
Well, Squinter wouldn't be the best example, perhaps, because to resurrect an immortal phrase. Can you resurrect something that's immortal? I don't know. I suspect you can't.
For the purpose of this conversation, you can do anything.
That's just good. We got a bit of leeway. So I would have an insight into Squinter's thinking, and I provide him with political analysis. Shall we put it that way? So we turn, and to that extent, that's perhaps not a great example of having to keep somebody in check. So I would have a fair insight into that before it appears on Twitter or in the paper. I
would suggest a good hurdle would do no harm. You know, a whack around the legs. Can I ask you? 30 years of journalism. I said that the paper has been to the civic centre of West Belfast and South and East.
Yeah.
How do you see things? Are things improving? Are things, are we stuck in a rut? Are we
in political terms? In political terms, or newspaper?
Life and politics has an effect on life, but do you think things are getting better?
Well, absolutely, without a doubt. I mean, I spoke earlier about my three children. As far as my daughter, who's starting her new job in September, is my eldest. She's about to start a new job as a lecturer, and she's never seen a British soldier with a gun, and that just absolutely delights me, and that never stops delighting me. And people, I think, tend to lose sight of that. So you listen to all this sturm and drang and this extraordinary attempt to whip things up in the loyalist community at the moment by the LCC and also by senior unionist politicians, excuse me, who should know better. I'm very good at compartmentalizing that, much as I'm appalled by it, but I'm very good at compartmentalizing it, setting it to the side and say, look, that's just noise. Do you know? And I think what I take a lot of hope from, Joe, is we're told that this is the angriest that loyalism and unionism has ever been. I don't see it. I hear a lot of people saying that.
Yeah.
No, I hear a lot of wee men with big mouths online saying that, and putting up memes and doing the rest and this and that. And I hear a lot of people who are older and who should know better, throwing dangerous talk around. But I mean, look at the turnout at these protests. It's pathetic. Look at the unrest, unwelcome and all as it was. It was damp squib, entirely a damp squib. I mean, if you were to tally what happened in those early days when it looked as if there might be trouble, it just went out like a firework on a wet night. So people aren't, in my opinion, they're failing to take the pulse of the loyalist community, and they're far too quick to accept the word of bucket mouths and charlatans who are proven bucket mouths and charlatans. It's not that suddenly they have become that because they're angry about the protocol, but they have a long track record of bucket mouthery and charlatanry, if that's such a word as charlatanry. I don't know.
It is, yeah.
But you understand the point I'm making.
Yeah.
So I look around me and I don't see it. I really don't see it. I mean, the protocol is operating away at Larne and Belfast. Okay, I'm not going to say that unionism is happy with it, or even that it wouldn't vote it down if it got the chance. Of course it would. But is it unhappy enough that they're wrecking the place? No. Is it unhappy enough that they're stopping the political institutions from working? No. So rather than, and this is one of the reasons I think the media has a lot to answer for here. They like to get, they say the noisy child gets the bottle. They love to get them on for clicks and numbers. So if you get somebody on, it's like James O'Brien, who I would listen to a lot. He has a great saying which says, everybody, when you go to a fair, everybody wants to buy a ticket for the ghost train. Nobody wants a ticket for the speak your wit machine. Do you know? So there's a bucket load of that in what we're seeing at the moment, which is that you have radio phone-in shows, you have political analysis shows on the TV, you have columnists and commentators in the daily and Sunday newspapers who are this woe is me, look at what's happening, loyalism's never. What I say is take a step back and say to yourself, where is it? I don't see it. So that aside, at the moment, no, I think life's good, Joe. I mean, and people, and I'm enjoying my children very much, and I'm enjoying my walking and my reading and the rest of it, and I'm enjoying getting older, because who was it said the alternative isn't a very good one, So I'm actively enjoying getting older and trying to remain fit and get rid of this lockdown stone and Alfie stone, as I call it. But I look around me and of course they're getting better. You look, for instance, down where you are. You look at the Scéalta quarter. You look at I know casement has stalled, but that's on track. You look at Andersonstown. I walk through Andersonstown at night, for instance. Now there's not many people there, but it's just lovely. I grew up there. It's the lighting, the pavements, the shop fronts, and this is all part of the Improving Belfast thing that Belfast City Council have done. They've done an extraordinarily good job in terms of what the place looks like on the falls and in Andersonstown. So there's a lot of that, and I enjoy life. I enjoy getting older, I enjoy the children, and I like walking about. But too many bucket mouths, and what's worse than that, there are bucket mouths all over the place. But there are too many people willing to give them a platform for entirely cynical reasons. And I think
And the Roddy's is open again, so you can.
Rally's is open again. So I was there on Monday night. I've only been there once. I went to my friend's garden last night to watch the soccer, and I enjoyed that. And the Roddy's is unrecognisable at the moment. It's just a building site outside, which is very exciting as well. You see the plans for that, and so you see so much going on, and how this community is changing for the better, and what it looks like. Don't get me wrong. This is still a very, very badly underserved community in terms of facilities and in terms of investment, and that legacy of the past is nowhere near having been caught up with yet. But anybody says it hasn't changed. You remember as well as I do, Joe. You walk along the Andersonstown and the Falls Road in the 80s and the 90s. It was like something out of one of those neo-realist British movies from the 60s. It was properly sort of grim, and now that's changed. The place we're looking at has changed. The lovely facilities we have developing around us, and I enjoy that very much, and I try to stay positive. And I've been reading a lot of our relatively new wellness column, which is about, and I've been studying that more about living in the moment. I mean, this is right where we are now. This is, your life's not what's going to happen next week. That's not to say you shouldn't worry or plan about things, but this is, if you're happy now, and I'm happy talking to you here, and you're happy talking to me, and I'm going to have a cup of tea in a minute and have a nice lunch, and I'm going to go out for a walk later. I'm going to finish the South Belfast news first if Martin's watching. So,
I'm not going to detain you for much longer, but I want to ask you two things, and then we've been talking for an hour, by the way. I don't know whether you've realised that, and an hour's quite a long time, and it's went by very quickly. Someone asked him about that he could have been a scout watching out for British Army patrols on behalf of his brother. I don't know whether you were good at it or bad at it. I know that your family was subject to constant searches and raids and all of the stuff that many families had to witness. And
it's not a secret that I have two brothers who served a lot of time in jail, and one brother, of course, had his conviction for which he served 17 years overturned very recently. But there's the conflict came to our family, and members of my family went to the conflict. So that's just the truth. And the British Army was a deeply maligned part of my life for a long time. From I was 8 or 9 years of age. I mean, we would be. I mean, for instance, what I remember, and I get very emotional thinking about this, especially with my father and mother. They would come into our house and turn all the lights off in the middle of the night with lamps on their guns, and they'd have black faces, and they'd take over the house and turn all the lights off, and they'd wait for one of my brothers to come home, who wasn't living at home, and thankfully never came. But we'd all be herded into a room with my parents, and that makes me very emotional thinking about that picture. I mean, being a father of 3, I mean, I never gave it a single thought when I was 10, 11, when I was 10 or 11, 12 or 13. It never occurred to me for a second how dehumanizing and distressing that must have been, well, for everybody, but certainly my parents, who did a great job of bringing so many of us up. But so there was the daily confrontations in the street, and don't get me wrong, we give plenty back, I mean, I remember we were mad about cricket, Joe, just mad about cricket.
Really?
I'd still be a big fan of cricket. We never stopped playing cricket in the street. It was our summer game, perhaps more than soccer, and we had a great cricket set. Every new regiment came in, thought this was the best thing since sliced bread, So they'd come along, and there was 20 of us playing cricket. I mean, we've got the field set, we've got the bales up, we've got the bat and all this crack. And we'll play it in the wee green at the cul-de-sac at Carrigart where I lived. And they'd all wander over with a big smile on their face and, hey, who's a silly mid off, and what's this, who's night watchman and all this crack. And we'd be like, and you'd see these kids themselves, these soldiers, all 19 or 20, first time ever in Belfast, you know, and to see this cricket game, and suddenly this place isn't so bad after all, and they come over and they're getting an absolute storm of abuse from these urchins who are playing their national game. So we gave a bit of stick back, don't get me wrong, but no, British Army was a very central and malign part of my life for a long time. So
this is the very last question, that you could probably see me have been distracted, or the engineers telling me. The last question, 30 years of journalism, 30 years of trying to control Squinter, looking after your family, losing your dog, all of that. Do we have another book pending?
Do I have what?
Is there another extension of the road?
I know I'm working on some fiction at the minute, Joe, which I'm sort of, I haven't got the I've ideas in my head which I'm trying to sort through, and the next thing I write, I hope is don't get me wrong, I have some non-fiction ideas as well, and but fiction primarily. I would like to dip my toe in that, in that particular stream. But it's just getting the discipline. Once you get into it, you know yourself, Joe. If you're holding off on something, you just got to hold your nose, jump in the deep end, and once you find yourself in the middle of it, it takes on a life of its own. So I'm at that stage where I'm standing, sort of shaking on the edge of the pool, and with a lot of ideas going through my head. I'm going to jump in and start putting the hours in terms of writing, and so that'll be my next.
Just as a matter of interest, I've never asked you this, but I'm going to ask you now, and it'll be the finishing sentence, I think. How do you describe, if you were categorizing the road, your book, how would you describe it? An adventure, a waltz down memory lane?
That's it, very much as a waltz down memory lane. It was very affectionate, you know.
Yeah,
It's just an affectionate look back on my boyhood. I mean, if I just leave you with this, Joe, you get to sort of a moment of pure joy crystallized, and a lot of things come into this about traveling. My father and I, he was a great walker as well. You see my dad on the road, and I'd bump a horn at him and drive on because I knew he was out for a walk and he didn't want to lift. So, and he drove everywhere, drove me to all these different places, which gave me a great love of being in places where you don't know what's around the corner. The greatest adventure for me in life was being out walking somewhere that you just literally don't know what's around the corner. I loved that. And I loved being out. And I was with my father one time, and we were barreling down it was a Thursday, which has been my favourite day ever since. And I have my feet up on the dashboard of the big lorry, and my dad's blattering along the M1. And I said to him, Daddy, what time are we going to be home? And he says, I think, and he looks at his watch and he says, I will be home about 4:15. So I looked at my dad and I looked at the road and looked at my feet in the dashboard, and then I think it was Scooby-Doo that I was watching then. And I knew I was going to be home in time for Scooby-Doo. And that's never left me. I must have been 12 or 13. And I have that memory in my head stuck, like it's just in very clear jar, that it's just there, that memory. So there's so much of my life to come that came out of that, loving to go to new places, do you know, and travel and being somewhere and being with your dad and being with people you love and what have you. So so that's it.
I suspect that there's many new places you have yet to find, not least of all to put this wedding over in Portugal, which will be another adventure for you.
Well, yeah, we're slowly but surely working on it. That's been called off twice. So a shout out for Katie and Fred, who have been absolutely stoic and wonderful in the face of it, because it must have been terribly painful for them. But sure, we'll get something out, and I know there's good times ahead for all of us, Joe. You know, for all of us,
Robin,
and that's my hope.
Prolific words. Can I thank you for being my guest in this conversation?
Thanks
for a long time. I have to ask you.
Thanks very much for inviting me, Joe, and I enjoyed it very much. I really did. Thanks very much.
All of that, Gormila Melvin.
No, right. I'm Ernest. All right.